basis that they're Palestinians and had their property confiscated by the absentee property law. One family that I know, for example, in Nazareth, who are a Christian Palestinian family as it happens, the grandmother of that family lived through the Nakba, lived through the ethnic cleansing of 1948 when Israel was established. And her family home is still standing a few minutes' drive from where she lives now with her family, but has never been allowed to go back into that house because the Palestinian community there that was depopulated was used to create a Jewish community. There's tens of thousands of Palestinian citizens who are in that sort of scenario, whereby despite being citizens in the state, have their lands and property denied to them. Another example, which is more recent, in the last 10 years or so, the citizenship law, referred to sometimes as the family separation law, means that if you're a Palestinian citizen and you want to get married to a Palestinian with West Bank ID, you can't now live together legally inside the state of Israel, okay? Because they're a Palestinian from the West Bank. That's the only reason that is allowed. And in fact, when some Israeli human rights groups appealed that law to the Israeli High Court of Justice, which again, disingenuously, some pro-Israel supporters try and paint as this kind of paragon of liberal virtue, whatever, the High Court of Justice affirmed the validity of that separation of a husband and wife being separated on the basis that one of them is a Palestinian from the West Bank or Gaza. And the reason why they said it was okay to do as a policy was because they said they wanted to avoid, quote-unquote, national suicide. Now, the language of wanting to avoid national suicide on the basis of the ethnicity of a person who might come and live in the state is exactly the sort of rhetoric you did see employed by the apartheid regime in South Africa, who talked about the idea of black South Africans having equality as equating to national suicide for white South Africans. That's just an interesting parallel there. Another example, many Israeli communities, small communities in rural areas, you can only live in them if you're accepted by a so-called admissions committee who vet potential residents on criteria that includes social suitability. Okay? And it's a way of filtering out undesirables from living in those communities. And undesirables will often or mainly include Palestinian citizens. So those are just a few examples. And remember, that's just talking about Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. Apparently, the Israeli Arabs who Israel tells us, who Netanyahu always says when he speaks to Congress or at AIPAC or whatever, he says, there are only, some Arabs who are free and have all their rights and they're citizens of Israel. That's what he tells people. I'll give you some more examples from East Jerusalem this time. East Jerusalem occupied by Israel since 1967, where Israel has planted settlers in defiance of international law. Many mayors of Jerusalem, Jewish mayors of Jerusalem, have openly talked about how there is a desired ratio of Jews and non-Jews, i.e. Jews and Palestinians for the city. Okay, imagine if the mayor of your city talked in that sort of language about an ethnic or religious minority, said, okay, actually, we only want that particular minority to not go up past this certain percentage. Okay, it's open racism, but that's the sort of policy that is not confined to some kind of extreme minority party, but is accepted mainstream ideology. Ehud Olmert, for example, when he was mayor of Jerusalem, said something very clearly and explicitly like that. You can find it in the Jerusalem Post. He said it's a problem when the number of non-Jews, Palestinians, when their number is rising faster than the number of Jews in Jerusalem. Okay? Openly explicit racist discourse, which then shapes policies to do with denial of permits for building, okay? Or to do with the zoning of land, for what purpose the land is meant to be for. You'll see East Jerusalem in the news a lot as well because of the radical religious settlers who go and live in Palestinian houses after the family has been evicted. The settlers will turn around, or the Israeli municipality of Jerusalem will turn around and say, well, what's the problem here? It's just a legal matter. They went to the courts, they proved that they originally owned this house or land from before 48, from before 67, so they're just reclaiming what is theirs. But even if you assume that was correct, I'd like to see the Jerusalem municipality allowing Palestinians back to claim their houses from which they were ethnically cleansed in so-called Western Jerusalem in 48. It's not going to happen, okay? Apparently it is selective the extent to which you can go back in time. Budget discrimination in East Jerusalem, of course, more recently as well, the separation wall, of which, you know, there's a kind of symbolic section up here that winds through neighborhoods.